All right, let's just jump right in with a pretty wild claim. What if I told you there was a time when William Shakespeare wasn't the biggest deal in English theater? Seriously, for a big part of the 1600s, there was this duo of playwrights who were so popular, they basically left the bard in their dust. And look, this isn't just some modern hot take. We have the receipts. The poet John Dryden, writing way back in 1684, lays it out plain and simple. For every one performance of a Shakespeare play, there were two of theirs. Just let that sink in. In what we think of Shakespeare's era, somebody else was doubling his ticket sales. Wow.
So that leads to the obvious question, right? Who in the world were these guys? And maybe even more interesting, how did they completely own the stage, only to, well, pretty much vanish from the history books?
Okay, so their names were Francis Beaumont and John Fletcher. And for the short but absolutely brilliant stretch in the early 1600s, their plays were the hottest ticket in London. I mean, we're talking about a level of fame that nobody had ever seen before. They weren't just writing plays, they were setting the trend for what everyone wanted to see. And they did it with a secret weapon. And that weapon? It was this revolutionary new type of play called tragicomedy. Now, they didn't invent it from scratch. But man, did they perfect it. They turned it into this unstoppable theatrical machine. This was the key to their incredible success. It's why they ruled the stage for almost 100 years. But, not everyone was thrilled about this new thing. The establishment, the big-name critics, they were horrified, absolutely horrified. To them, mixing all this highbrow tragedy with lowbrow comedy, all the tears and the laughter together, it was just wrong. It was like breaking all the rules. Yeah, one of the most famous critics of the time, Sir Philip Sidney, he called it a mongrel tragicomedy. He was basically calling it a mutt, a mongrel. He hated the whole idea of mashing up kings and clowns or having happy music and funerals in the same story. For the purists, this stuff was just a total mess. So what exactly was it? Well, we can actually get the definition straight from one of the masters. John Fletcher himself laid it out. He said a tragicomedy isn't just about mixing laughs and death. The real trick is that it avoids a final tragic death. So, okay, it's not a tragedy, but it brings its characters right to the edge of total disaster, which means it's definitely not a straight-up comedy either. And this really shows you the two worlds they were trying to connect. So on one side, you've got your capital T tragedy, right? It's all about kings and heroes, and it pretty much always ends in death or some huge disaster. Then, on the other side, you have comedy. That's about regular folks, and it usually ends with a wedding or everyone making up. What tragicomedy did was just smash those two worlds together. But here's the kicker. While Beaumont and Fletcher totally nailed this for their audience, this whole argument about mixing genres, it wasn't new at all. In fact, this debate is ancient. We're talking about an argument that goes all the way back to the birth of Western theater. I mean, just look at this timeline. This was not a new idea in the 1600s. We're talking about a controversy that was already almost 2,000 years old before Shakespeare was even born. You've got Greek satyr plays, playwrights breaking the tragedy rules, and even the Romans coining the actual term. This has been a fight about ideas for a very long time. And we can actually pinpoint the very first time the word tragicomedy shows up in writing. It's in the intro to a play by a Roman guy named Plautus, way back around 200 BC. He basically tells the audience, hey, I'm mixing things up here. I'm putting gods on stage with slaves. He figured he needed a brand new word for this weird mix, and boom, tragicomedy was born. And even before the Romans, the Greeks were already hashing this out. The whole debate really boils down to two of the biggest names in philosophy. You've got Aristotle on one side, who pretty much wrote the rule book. He said tragedy and comedy are total opposites, and you should never ever mix them. But then you have his teacher, Plato, who had a totally different idea. He basically said, hey, life itself is a mix of good and bad, joy and sadness, so why shouldn't our plays be like that too? Okay, so let's jump back in the time machine and go even further back. Let's look at where this whole urge to mix things up really came from. And that takes us to the wild, chaotic world of ancient Greek theater and this really weird thing called the satyr drama. So the whole point of these plays was basically relief. I mean, imagine you've been sitting there all day watching these super heavy, serious tragedies, one after another. You'd be exhausted, right? The satyr play was the answer. They even called it a playful tragedy. It was designed to let everyone blow off some steam and go home with a smile. And these plays were absolutely bonkers. You'd have a serious story with a famous hero like Odysseus, but then they'd throw in this chorus of rowdy, half-man, half-goat creatures, satyrs. And these guys were just there to be loud, rude, and cause chaos. It was the official fourth play of the day at the big theater festivals, and people at the time described it perfectly. It was halfway between tragedy and comedy. And get this, even the big-name tragedy writers were bending the rules. The playwright Euripides, for instance, once put on a play called Alcestis in the time slot that was supposed to be for a satyr play. It starts off like a total tragedy. The main character dies, but then it ends with her coming back to life. A happy ending. I mean, for 438 BC, that was some seriously radical stuff. All right, let's fast forward a lot, like 2,000 years. After being pretty much dormant for centuries, this ancient idea of a mixed-up genre comes roaring back to life in the Renaissance. And this wasn't just an English thing either. You can see right here that tragicomedy was blowing up all over Europe. In Italy, it was super controversial, sparking huge arguments. Over in France, a play called Le Cid got hammered by critics for not following the old-school rules. But in England, well, that's where Fletcher and Beaumont cracked the code and figured out how to make it a massive, massive hit. And that's really the thing to remember about them. They didn't invent tragicomedy, but they are the ones who perfected it. They took this old, controversial idea and fine-tuned it so perfectly for English audiences that it just completely took over. It became the thing to see. But this is where the story gets really ironic, because while the names Beaumont and Fletcher might not mean much to most people today, the genre they championed, well, that's had a huge, lasting impact on pretty much all storytelling, right up to today. Yeah, you almost never see their plays anymore. Like one critic said, they've been in near oblivion for centuries. But the idea behind their work, the idea that a story can be tragic and funny, serious and ridiculous, sometimes all in the same scene, that idea never died. It's immortal. And you can see its fingerprints everywhere. Their success actually pushed Shakespeare to try it out in his later plays. The idea kept evolving and eventually became a huge deal in 20th century theater. I mean, when Samuel Beckett was asked what his masterpiece, Waiting for Godot, was, he had a simple answer: a tragicomedy. That thing the critics once called a mongrel. It became the voice of the modern stage. And that kind of brings us back to where we started, with that old debate between Plato and Aristotle. It leaves us with a question, really. If life itself is this messy mix of happy and sad, of serious and silly, then can any story that's trying to be truthful ever really be just one genre?
All right, let's dive right in and study the life of Francis Beaumont. Now, you probably know him as one of the great playwrights of the English Renaissance, part of a legendary duo. But what we're finding out now, thanks to some new research, is that behind the official story, his life was, well, it was a mess. A fascinating, dramatic mess that's way more interesting than the legend. So let's peel back those layers.
So, let's kick things off with this juicy bit of 17th century gossip from the writer John Aubrey. Get this. He's describing Beaumont and his famous collaborator John Fletcher, and it sounds like they're living in the ultimate bachelor pad, sharing a house, a bed, clothes, and yep, apparently even a girlfriend. It's a pretty racy image, right? It hints at this incredibly close bohemian lifestyle, but also maybe poverty, the kind that forces you to share everything. And that's our first clue that the neat and tidy version of Beaumont's life we've been told is missing some pretty big details.
But before we get into all the drama, let's just establish the official legend. And really, his final resting place tells you everything you need to know about how the world saw him.
Francis Beaumont is buried in Poets' Corner in Westminster Abbey. I mean, think about that for a second. That is a huge honor. To be laid to rest alongside monarchs, national heroes, it basically cemented his status as this giant of English literature. This is the Beaumont we're supposed to remember. Celebrated, respected, monumental.
And his resume was stacked. He was a protege of the great Ben Jonson, a son of Ben. His partnership with John Fletcher, it was so iconic they were often just called Beaumont Fletcher, like they were a single person. And get this, in 1609 they actually took over from William Shakespeare as the main playwrights for the King's Men, the most important theater company in London. The guy was basically a rock star.
So, that's the legend. But as it turns out, behind this glittering facade of fame and success, court documents are now showing us a much darker reality. A story of serious, crippling financial desperation.
You know, the romantic image we all have is of Beaumont holding court with other writers at the famous Mermaid Tavern, right? Spouting poetry, drinking wine. But the reality? Court records show that between 1608 and 1610, Francis Beaumont was being dragged into the Court of King's Bench again and again for failing to pay some absolutely enormous debts.
The grand total was £500. Now, I know, that might not sound like a crazy amount today, but in the early 1600s, it was a fortune. This wasn't like he was a little behind on his bills. This was a full-blown, life-altering financial crisis.
And this is how you know how bad it got. In 1609, right at the peak of this mess, he sold his entire family inheritance, all of his land in Leicestershire, for just 10 shillings. That's not a real sale, of course. It was a desperate legal move to try and get out from under the crushing weight of what he owed. He literally gave away his birthright for pocket change.
And this timeline shows it wasn't a quick thing. This was a prolonged nightmare. He takes on the debt in 1607. By 1608, he's already being sued. 1609, he makes that desperate sale of his land. It's not until late 1610 that he even starts to resolve one of these lawsuits. So we're talking years of intense financial and legal pressure, all while his career was supposedly exploding.
Okay, and this is where it gets truly fascinating. What does a writer do when his life is spinning out of control? He takes all that stress, all that real-life anxiety, and he channels it directly into his art.
Just listen to the opening lines of The Scornful Lady, a play he co-wrote right in the middle of all his money troubles. A character is asking about a mortgage, complaining that a moneylender has sucked in thousands of pounds worth of his land. Sound familiar? It's an almost perfect echo of what was happening to Beaumont in real life.
But here's the thing, the play isn't a straight-up autobiography. It's more like what you might call a prodigal fantasy. The main character, young Lovelace, he's an indebted younger brother, just like Beaumont. But on stage, he gets the happy ending. He's clever, he outwits the moneylender, and he marries a rich widow and gets his fortune. It's basically wish fulfillment theater.
He also made a really crucial change for the stage. In the play, the villain is this classic, greedy city moneylender. But in reality, the guys suing Beaumont weren't some cartoon villains. They were from his own social world, knights, fellow lawyers. The truth was way more complicated and probably way more embarrassing. So for the stage, he just simplified it, created a clear bad guy that the audience could root against.
So, money was one massive hidden pressure in Beaumont's life. But there was another one, and at the time, it was just as dangerous, religion. And just like with his debts, he took this anxiety and put it right on the stage.
And here we go again, another clash between the public legend and the private reality. His friends and admirers painted him as the staunch, orthodox member of the Church of England, the kind of guy who could argue with Catholic Jesuits and win. But then you look at his family tree, and you see a completely different picture.
I mean, he was surrounded by devout Catholics, or recusants, who refused to conform to the state church and were constantly being punished for it. His grandmother fought the laws, his half-sister was prosecuted, his brother was persecuted for his faith, even his own wife, Ursula, was indicted for it. The idea that Beaumont was just this simple, orthodox Anglican, completely untouched by all this, it just seems, well, pretty unlikely.
And you have to remember the timing here. He wrote the play The Woman Hater in 1606. This is just months after the Gunpowder Plot of 1605. The whole country was gripped by this intense anti-Catholic paranoia. Informers were everywhere, and anyone with Catholic connections, like Beaumont's entire family, was under suspicion. So what's the play about? It's a brilliant, dark comedy about exactly that paranoia. A food-obsessed guy named Lazarillo has one goal in life: to eat the head of this rare fish. That's it. But government spies overhear bits and pieces of his plot, and they twist his totally innocent, food-crazy words into a massive conspiracy of treason, accusing him of a plan involving fire, steel, and poison, a direct echo of the Gunpowder Plot. It's a hilarious satire on how easily innocent words could be twisted into something deadly. So, what does this all tell us? What do you do with all this? You've got this celebrated playwright who in secret is drowning in debt and trying to navigate a world that's incredibly hostile to his family's faith. Well, his coping mechanism was simple. He wrote about it.
This table really just lays it all out, doesn't it? His crippling personal debt, that becomes a story about a clever prodigal son who wins in the end. The very real danger his Catholic family was in, that becomes a farce about an innocent man's obsession being twisted into treason. He was literally processing his own life on stage for everyone to see.
And that's the key takeaway here. Beaumont and Fletcher were like alchemists. They took the messy, difficult, and sometimes ugly raw materials of Beaumont's actual life and they completely transformed them. They turned personal anxiety into hit comedies, basically transmuting the base metal of real life into theatrical gold.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? For any artist, really. Where is that line? When does your actual life stop and the story you tell everyone about it begin?
You see, for Francis Beaumont, the stage wasn't just about entertainment. It was a place where he could finally take control of the narrative. In a life that was marked by debt and religious tension he couldn't control, the theater gave him a second chance, a chance to rewrite his own story, and this time, deal himself the winning hand.
Let's now study the life of John Fletcher.
So, what if I told you that for a time, Shakespeare wasn't actually the biggest name in English theater? In this explainer, we're diving into the story of a playwright you might not know, but who was once an absolute giant of the stage, a man whose fame and popularity really did rival the bard himself.
I know. It's hard to imagine, right? But back in the early 17th century, that's the Jacobean era, right after Queen Elizabeth, another writer's work was so popular it nearly eclipsed Shakespeare's. His plays weren't just hits, they were massive cultural events that completely defined what sophisticated audiences wanted to see.
And get this man didn't just work alongside Shakespeare, he was literally hand-picked to carry the torch for the most famous acting company in London after Shakespeare was gone. So, who was this forgotten star? Well, his story, very fittingly, kicks off with some pretty high-stakes family drama.
John Fletcher was born in 1579, and his father, Richard Fletcher, was a man of, let's just say, towering ambition. I mean, he climbed the clerical ladder all the way to Bishop of London, becoming a personal chaplain to Queen Elizabeth I. He was right there in the center of power, even officiating at one of history's most charged moments, the execution of Mary, Queen of Scots.
That was his actual cry as the axe fell. This was a man determined to make his mark. But you know how these things go. That same ambition led to a sudden, spectacular downfall. He made a marriage the queen had forbidden, and boom, he was instantly cast out from royal favor. Shortly after, he died, leaving his 8 children not with a fortune, but with a mountain of debt.
So this was the world John Fletcher was born into, a world of sudden triumph and just catastrophic failure. He was orphaned, his family name was tarnished, and their finances were in complete ruins. His path forward was anything but clear. He did attend Cambridge University, but even then, a secure career was no guarantee at all. But from these really challenging beginnings, he found his way right into the heart of London's vibrant theater scene. And it was there that he would form one of the most legendary partnerships in literary history.
In London, Fletcher found his people at the famous Mermaid Tavern, rubbing shoulders with all the literary giants of the day. We're talking Ben Jonson and, yes, even William Shakespeare. And it was here he met his most famous collaborator, Francis Beaumont. Together, they were a total powerhouse. Fletcher was incredibly prolific, with a really distinct voice that scholars can still trace today through his habit of using ye instead of you.
Their partnership was so successful, it literally became a brand. They were seen as a single creative force in the public's mind. In fact, a popular anecdote from the time claimed they were totally inseparable, living together, sharing everything. You get the picture.
Now, whether that story is true or not, who knows? But it just goes to show how closely they were linked. Their combined name, Beaumont and Fletcher, was so powerful that it was stamped on dozens of plays, even ones Fletcher wrote alone or with other people after Beaumont retired from the stage.
And their incredible impact is perfectly illustrated by this number, 53. That's how many plays were collected in the second Beaumont and Fletcher folio. It's a massive body of work that absolutely captivated audiences. But after Beaumont left the stage, Fletcher's career was about to hit a whole new level.
With Beaumont retired, Fletcher started working closely with the most prestigious company in London, the King's Men, and he kept up his habit of collaboration. Just look at this list. It is a literal who's who of Jacobean playwrights. But his most significant new partner was the company's own star playwright.
That's right, Fletcher's most famous collaboration from this period was with William Shakespeare himself. They co-wrote at least 3 plays, including Henry VIII, and it was during a performance of that very play that one of the most infamous disasters in theater history went down. A stage cannon misfired, and the original Globe Theatre burned right to the ground.
That fire pretty much marked the end of Shakespeare's career. He retired to Stratford soon after.
Then, just 3 years later, in 1616, Shakespeare died. The King's Men, the most successful acting company in the entire country, had just lost their leading voice.
So the company needed a new star. They needed someone who could consistently deliver hits, keep the theater packed, and who really understood what their sophisticated audiences were hungry for. For them, the choice was obvious.
John Fletcher became the man who officially succeeded William Shakespeare. I mean, think about that. It was a massive vote of confidence, a huge testament to his talent and his commercial appeal. And what he gave audiences was something new, a genre he would absolutely perfect.
Fletcher's most lasting contribution was popularizing tragicomedy. It was a new style of play that perfectly suited the tastes of those elite Jacobean audiences. And who better to define it for us than Fletcher himself, who actually wrote this very explanation?
He actually wrote that definition after one of his early solo plays failed because the audience just didn't get it yet. But he soon perfected the formula. You take aristocratic characters, stick them in exotic locations, tangle them up in these high-stakes romantic plots that push them to the absolute brink of disaster, and then, at the last possible second, you save them with a shocking, brilliant reversal of fortune. It was the perfect genre for an audience that loved clever courtly drama and intellectual surprises more than just a bloody tragedy.
He completely perfected this blend of suspense and surprise, creating thrilling plays that kept audiences glued to their seats. The style was so influential, it became the dominant form of drama for decades, cementing Fletcher's legacy long after his own tragic death from the plague. You know, when you look at it, his life, from a disgraced father's son all the way to the top of the London theatre world, was every bit as dramatic and full of reversals as one of his own plays. Which really brings us to this final, crucial question. It's a thought worth pondering. Fletcher's story is a powerful reminder that fame can be incredibly fleeting, and that history isn't always a simple story of who was best, but often a story of whose work survives and who happens to get championed by later generations. Next, we will look at some of the plays that made them famous.
Okay, so let's dive into some of the most famous works from an incredible duo. And the first one we're going to tackle is the Maid's tragedy, first hitting the stage around 1619. Now this play, it's a story packed with sex, power, and loyalty, and it was so shocking it was a source of scandal for literally centuries.
You know, it's funny, we always think of Shakespeare when we think of this era, right? But before his fame completely eclipsed everyone else's, Francis Beaumont and John Fletcher were the real rock stars of the Jacobean stage. I mean, these guys were so famous for their collaborations that Beaumont and Fletcher basically became a brand name, a stamp that guaranteed theatrical genius and a smash hit.
And when you look at their track record, you can totally see why. In just a handful of years, they were churning out hit after hit. But of all of them, The Maid's Tragedy, well, that one really stands out. It's got to be one of their most powerful, most radical, and for sure, one of their most controversial plays.
So here's how we're going to break down this dark masterpiece. We'll start with the corrupt bargain that kicks the whole tragedy off. Then we'll get into the two very different responses it sparks in the main characters. And finally, we'll unpack the bloody and controversial legacy this play left behind.
Okay, let's get into it. The whole play is built on this foundation of lies and deception, and it all starts with a wedding that is frankly rotten to the core.
So here's the setup, and it is messy. You've got the King of Rhodes who wants to keep having an affair with a noblewoman named Evadne. So, to cover his tracks, what does he do? He forces one of his most loyal guys, Amintor, to dump the woman he's actually engaged to, Aspasia, and marry Evadne instead. Just like that, this one single act weaves this incredibly tangled web of dishonor, and it drags everyone down into the king's corrupt little world.
And the truth? Oh, it comes out in the most brutal way you can imagine. On their wedding night, Amintor's new bride, Evadne, just coldly shuts him down with this chilling line. She reveals she's not some innocent maiden. Nope, she's the king's mistress. In that one moment, Amintor's entire world, his honor, everything just shatters. And that, right there, is what sets the stage for all the tragedy that's about to unfold.
Okay, so let's track how this all builds, because Evadne's journey, wow, she goes from being a political pawn to a full-on violent revenger. And her transformation is honestly one of the most radical things about this entire play. Her response to all this corruption is, well, it's anything but conventional.
And what's so fascinating is that Evadne knows she's crossing a line. She recognizes that her actions, her feelings, they're pushing her way beyond the boundaries of what a woman is supposed to be in her time. You can see her internal conflict right here in this quote. It's like she's splitting herself into two. There's the I who is taking action, and then there's the woman she's supposed to be, the one she's defying. She literally sees herself as monstrous, as something entirely new.
So, to really wrap our heads around what's happening with Evadne, modern critics often turn to queer theory. And this definition from Eve Kosofke-Sedgwick, it's perfect. The idea is basically this. Gender isn't one fixed solid thing. It's more like a collection of different parts, different performances that don't always line up neatly. And that's exactly what this play is doing with Evadne's character.
This is where it gets really cool. The play builds Evadne's identity in layers. On stage, she isn't just one thing, right? First, you have the fictional female character herself. But then you've also got the very real physical body of the boy actor who's playing her. Remember, that's how it was done back then. Then they add this idea of the humoral body, describing her with hot lust, which was seen as a male trait. And to top it off, there's what we could call an intertextual body. She acts a lot like famous male revengers from other popular plays, like Hamlet. When you put all these layers together, you get this incredibly unstable, but also incredibly powerful gender identity.
And this really highlights just how obsessed the play is with the physical body. I mean, the stage is constantly filled with scenes of people undressing or just talking about bodies. The body becomes the literal battlefield. You know, it's the place where all this political corruption happens, and it's also where the violent revenge finally goes down.
And this is the peak of her transformation, the absolute climax. Right in the moment when she kills the king, she flat out rejects what it means to be a conventional woman. She disowns that cold spirit she connects with womanhood and instead claims this new, terrifying, and very masculine power to commit regicide. Yep, the act of killing a king.
Okay, so Evadne's path is all about bloody, decisive action. But her husband, Amintor, he's the total opposite. He's facing the exact same corruption, but instead of acting, he is completely paralyzed by his own internal conflict. His response is just nothing. Total inaction.
And this is really the crucial point, right? This is the big philosophical battle at the heart of the play. On one side, you've got a mentor who is just psychologically trapped. He believes the king is sacred, untouchable, basically God's deputy on earth. So for him, to act against the king is to act against God himself. But then on the other side, you have Melanthius, Evadne's brother. He's a soldier, a man of action, and for him, personal and family honor are everything. He believes justice has to be served, and he doesn't care who the bad guy is. It's this collision of ideas that just rips the kingdom apart.
This quote just perfectly sums up Amintor's tragic flaw. He's admitting it right here. He's got the anger, he's got the reason to kill the king, but his unshakable belief in the divinity of the monarchy just stops him dead in his tracks. It makes him powerless. And it's this blind loyalty to the very man who ruined his life, that ultimately seals his tragic fate.
So, this explosive clash between action and inaction, between revenge and loyalty, it all leads to one heck of a bloody ending. And it leaves behind a controversial legacy that would haunt this play for centuries to come. So after Evadne kills the king, you might think that's the end of it. Nope, the violence just keeps going, spiraling completely out of control. By the time the curtain falls, the stage is just littered with corpses. You've got the king, the revenger Evadne, the loyal Amintor, and even the innocent Espatia. All of them are dead. It is a classic, absolutely brutal Jacobean tragedy.
And look, the whole idea of killing a king on stage, it was so radical back then that the play's history is just one long story of it being suppressed and rewritten. Get this, it was first performed by King James's own acting troupe, but later on it was banned by King Charles II. You know, the king whose own father had been executed. They even rewrote it with a happy pro-king ending just to make it less politically explosive.
The play wraps up on this really ambiguous note. It's sending a chilling warning to tyrants, saying, hey, God's justice will find you. But at the same time, it warns the people who carry out that justice, the revengers, God's instruments, that they're going to be cursed for it too. There are no easy answers here. And that leaves us with this final, lingering question. When a state is corrupt all the way to the top, who is really the one to blame for the tragedy that follows? Is it the tyrant, the revenger, the loyal subject? Because the play refuses to give us a simple moral, The Maid's tragedy feels like a really disturbing and strikingly modern political thriller. It asks these huge questions about power, justice, and loyalty.
Questions that, let's be honest, are just as relevant today as they were 400 years ago.
Let's talk about a play that absolutely electrified London audiences around 1610. It was the second big hit from the writing duo Beaumont and Fletcher, and it was called Philaster. This thing basically pioneered a whole new genre, the tragicomedy. It had romance, political backstabbing, sword fights, everything you could want. But at its heart was this really revolutionary idea about love. And we're going to unlock it with a line from let's just say, a very different kind of story. I know, American Pie. But seriously, that one line right there, it perfectly captures this strange, thrilling feeling that's at the very core of this 400-year-old play. This isn't about being manipulated, it's something way more complex and, believe it or not, pleasurable. Because that idea, the genuine pleasure of being an instrument for someone else's love, of being used and actually finding joy in it, that is the engine driving Beaumont and Fletcher's wild tragicomedy, Philaster, or Love Lies a-Bleeding. Okay, so picture it. You're in early Stuart London. You're at the Globe or the Blackfriars Theatre, and this new play is the talk of the town. It's a total roller coaster of drama, intense emotion, and twists you just don't see coming. It had audiences literally on the edge of their seats. So the setup is pure high-stakes royal drama. We're in Sicily. You've got a usurper king on the throne who stole it. You've got the rightful heir, Prince Philaster, who the people love but who's basically powerless. And then there's the king's daughter, Princess Arethusa. She's the key to everything, and her dad plans to marry her off to some Spanish prince to lock down his power and cut Philaster out for good. But, of course, there's a problem, a big one. Arethusa and Philaster are madly, secretly in love. So the huge question is, how on earth can they communicate, or as the play puts it, hold intelligence, when the entire court is watching their every single move? They need a brilliant outside-the-box solution. And their solution isn't a secret note. It's not a hidden tunnel. No, it's a person. A third person who is going to become the living, breathing channel for their love, and in the process completely change what that love even is. So Philaster brings in his page boy, Bellario. He tells the story about finding this pretty sad talking boy by a fountain, just weeping and weaving a garland of flowers. And Bellario has this special art. He can translate pure emotion into physical things. That garland wasn't just pretty, it had a mystic order, a story he could read. So right away, you know he's not just some delivery boy, he's more like a living, breathing generator of affection. And this brings us right to the heart of what makes his play so radical. It's this idea of erotic instrumentality. For Bellario, being used to carry messages and feelings between the lovers isn't a chore. It's a profound source of intimacy and pleasure. It turns a simple couple into this intense, three-way emotional bond. Now, to get just how different this is, think about a play you probably know, Shakespeare's Twelfth Night. That's a classic love triangle of conflicting desire, right? Everybody wants someone they can't have. But Philaster is totally different. The desire here is convergent. Philaster and Arethusa's love flows through Bellario, and Bellario's own desire is to be that channel. Their wants all line up in this really unique queer formation. And when we say queer here, we mean it in the sense of deviating from the norm, in this case, the standard two-person romance. It's a relationship with its own beautiful, strange logic. But here's the thing about a system that operates on its own logic. It is incredibly fragile. Behind closed doors, it's perfect. But it is fatally vulnerable to how the outside world sees it. And the court can only see it one way. They see the princess spending all her time with this beautiful, smooth boy, and their minds go right to one conclusion: a secret, scandalous affair. The gossip spreads like wildfire. The actual truth of their three-way intimacy, this unique bond, it's completely invisible to the court's conventional eyes. They see betrayal where there's actually this incredibly deep loyalty. And here's the absolute tragedy. Philaster, he falls for it. He hears the rumors and his trust just evaporates. This beautiful, delicate system they built together just shatters. He starts interrogating Bellario, twisting every sign of their shared affection into proof of a lie. The whole thing falls apart, and the play just spirals into pure rage and violence. And it all leads to one of the most shocking scenes on the entire Jacobean stage. During a royal hunt, Philaster is so consumed by this jealous passion
that he pulls out his sword and he stabs Princess Arethusa. And that brutal act is what gives the play its title, Love Lies a-Bleeding. So, we've hit rock bottom. The hero has just stabbed his lover, the go-between is accused of being a traitor, the whole thing is a bloody, emotional mess. How in the world does a play come back from that? How does a tragicomedy possibly find its way to a happy ending? Well, the answer is in the final act, and it all hangs on one last, absolutely stunning revelation. A twist so big, it makes you rethink everything you just saw. Okay, so to save Philaster from being executed, Bellario finally confesses the truth. The page boy is actually a woman. Her name is Euphrasia, and she's a courtier's daughter who disguised herself as a boy just so she could be close to Philaster, who she secretly loved this whole time. And just like that, poof, the rumors of an affair are suddenly impossible and the whole crisis just dissolves.
But what's so remarkable here is what Euphrasia actually wants. She tells Philaster she never ever intended to marry him. She says, "For could I but have lived in presence of you, I had had my end." Her goal was just to be near him, to serve him. Her fulfillment existed completely outside the idea of marriage.
And then the play's conclusion gets even more radical. Instead of kicking out her supposed rival, Princess Arethusa does something incredible. She looks right at Euphrasia and says, "Come live with me." She completely understands that Euphrasia's love for Philaster isn't a threat. It's a bond to be welcomed and cherished. So the play doesn't wrap up with a neat little wedding that puts everything back into a two-person box. No, it ends by restoring the trio. Philaster, Arethusa, and Euphrasia are reunited, and their three-way bond is basically sanctioned as a new kind of family. It completely defies convention and gives us this vision of a chosen, queer household. And so this wild 400-year-old play leaves us with a question that feels incredibly modern. By putting a character whose greatest happiness is being the loving connection between two other people right at its center, Philaster asks all of us, does love always have to be a story for two? All right, let's dive into the third play from that dynamic duo Beaumont and Fletcher. It's called A King and No King, and it hit the stage way back in 1611. Now, this was the Jacobean era, right? A time of a lot of political weirdness and big cultural shifts under King James I. And let me tell you, this play is an absolute masterclass in the kind of emotional whiplash that audiences back then just ate up. Yeah, this play was designed to do one thing, and one thing only: provoke. It was built for an audience that was craving excitement, an audience that was not afraid of a little controversy. And at its very heart is a central, unspeakable taboo that just drives the whole plot forward. Okay, so to really get this story, you gotta understand the genre it's playing in. This is a tragicomedy. And what that means is it's a form that pushes its characters right to the edge of absolute disaster. It just cranks up that tension until you, the audience, can't see any possible way out. And then, bam, with a stunning twist, it pulls everything back and gives you a happy ending. So let's meet our protagonist. He is, the living, breathing definition of this blend of extremes. So this is King Arbaces of Iberia. Now, in public, he's the ultimate hero. He's just come home from defeating the king of Armenia in single combat. Total stud. But his own captain, Mardonius, he knows the real story. In private, Arbaces is a mess of intense, uncontrolled emotions. We're talking swinging from this huge, boastful pride to weeping with guilt in, the blink of an eye. So he gets back to court, and the plan seems pretty straightforward, right? He's gonna marry off his sister, Panthea, who's famously beautiful and virtuous, to the captive king he's brought home. It's a standard political move, nice and easy. Well, that plan absolutely goes up in flames the second he lays eyes on her. You have to remember, he hasn't seen her since she was a little kid, and now he is just completely floored by her beauty and instantly falls into this forbidden, incestuous love. And this agonizing, forbidden passion, well, that becomes the central crisis of the entire play. It's threatening to tear the whole kingdom and his sanity completely apart. And here's the kicker, the real twist. Panthea feels the exact same unsisterly desire for him. So now both of them are thrown into this desperate moral tailspin, totally horrified by what they're feeling, but just unable to deny it. It all just boils over after one single kiss. Our bosses, just racked with guilt, violently orders Panthea to be locked away. And she actually accepts it, believing that being imprisoned is the only way she can protect her honor and stop them from committing a truly terrible sin. Okay, so you might be thinking, wow, this is heavy. And the playwrights knew that. To stop the audience from totally drowning in all this intense royal drama, the play does this masterfully clever pivot and injects a huge dose of just silly, lowbrow comedy to break the tension. And this comes to us through a character named Captain Bessus. He's a perfect example of a classic character type. You might have heard of it, the milites gloriosus. It's just a fancy way of saying the braggart soldier. Audiences back then would have spotted him a mile away. All talk and absolutely no fight. So Bessus is the play's hilarious comic relief. See, he spent years building this reputation as a great warrior, but it is all a complete lie. And now that he's back from the war, every single guy he ever insulted is lining up to challenge him to a duel. And we get to watch him comically try to squirm his way out of a whopping 213 different challenges. And this is just a brilliant example of that tragicomedy structure we talked about. You have Bessus's very public, very physical cowardice, and it's this hilarious mirror to Arbus's private moral cowardice. While Bessus is afraid for his skin, the king is afraid for his soul. It is high drama, perfectly balanced with low comedy. Meanwhile, back in the main plot, that high drama is kicking into overdrive. Arbus's inner conflict is hitting a breaking point, and he starts planning something, well, truly horrific. Yeah, he's completely convinced there is no honorable way out. So he decides on this final, catastrophic plan. He's going to kill his loyal captain, he's going to assault his own sister, and then he's going to take his own life. I mean, it seems like the tragedy is completely locked in. But right as he is about to put this terrible plan into motion, the Queen Mother Arne and the Lord Protector Gobrius step in. They reveal a secret they have been hiding for his entire life, a twist that changes everything. It turns out Arbuses isn't the king by blood. He's not even the queen's son at all. He is an imposter. He is the son of Gobrius, and he was secretly placed on the throne as a baby to solve a succession crisis. And what does that mean? It means Panthea is not his sister. So think about this for a second. The one thing that has defined his entire life, his royal blood, is a complete and total lie. And his reaction? Pure joy. He is ecstatic to find out he's a fraud because it means his love isn't a sin. He is finally free from all that guilt. And just like that, everything falls into place. He's no longer the king. Panthea is the rightful queen. Their love is now totally legitimate, and by marrying her, he can become a true king after all, this time through law and love, not through a lie. But, this incredible plot twist, it wasn't just some clever trick to get a happy ending. Oh no, it gave the play this surprising and really powerful afterlife, cementing its legacy way beyond the Jacobean stage. So fast forward a few decades after its premiere, England gets plunged into a real-life political crisis, the English Civil War. Theaters are all shut down, but the play's title, it finds a new and very urgent meaning in all that political chaos. Yeah, that phrase, a king and no king, it was basically lifted straight from the play and became this political catchphrase used in pamphlets and debates. It was the perfect way to describe the real King Charles I, a monarch whose authority was just collapsing around him, a ruler who had the title of king but no longer the real power. And this is why this all matters. A fictional story about a crisis of personal identity became a powerful metaphor for a nation's very real political crisis. The play actually gave people a language, a shorthand to discuss the paradoxes of their own crazy times. Which leaves us with the play's central lingering question, one that haunted the 17th century and, still echoes today. Is it birthright? Is it character? Or is it the love of the people that truly makes a ruler legitimate?